Okay, let's try talking about fiscal policy today. Fiscal policy is the study of how governments spend money or manipulate spending and taxes to try and achieve macroeconomic outcomes. And so we're going to do this in the context of the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model that we've developed, featuring three pieces: long-run aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply, and aggregate demand. And we're going to think, first of all, about how things work without government. So consider a negative shock. Maybe something happens to investment. And we know that aggregate demand is C plus I plus G plus NX. So when investment falls, this is going to be bad for aggregate demand. Aggregate demand shifts to the left, causing a recession, pushing prices down. Prices fall, output falls. In the recession has unemployment because output is below potential. Firms have laid people off to reduce production, and that means that unemployment is going to cause reductions in wages. As wages fall, firms change their behavior. And so firms change their behavior because when workers are cheaper, they hire more of them to maximize profits. This is what shifts short-run aggregate supply down. The economy eventually recovers naturally. Something bad happens. Well, something bad has happened, but our long-run aggregate supply hasn't been affected. We still have the same skills, machinery, tools, equipment, but the prices are messed up. In particular, wages are messed up. When we give it enough time, wages adjust, prices fall, and eventually the recession is cured. But, you see, the government is here, and the government can also influence aggregate demand. So let's think about what the government can do. The government can then intervene as well. So we still have our model of three parts, and I'm still going to do the same example where we have investment falling. Investment falling is shifting down the aggregate demand curve, but again, aggregate demand C plus I plus G plus NX, the government could look at this situation and say, well, both of these things show up here. I can just raise government spending in response to the investment falling, and I can shift aggregate demand right back. Yes, something bad happened to aggregate demand, but I can shift it back and we can restore equilibrium at the original level of output. The key issue here is speed. We need to be aware of how fast the government can move. The way that I drew it here, the government shifts the aggregate demand curve back immediately, and so the recession is cured instantaneously before any of the sticky wages start adjusting. But in the real world, it takes time. The government can't spend money immediately, and so we might not be able to shift that aggregate demand curve back right away. But the longer we wait to shift the aggregate demand curve, the more wages start adjusting and more the economy starts healing by itself. The recession is a very bad thing. Lots of people are laid off, their families are rotting, they're not earning income. The society is losing because they're not producing. The faster we can move that aggregate demand curve back, the better it is for everyone. However, this is only one way a recession can be caused. There are other types of recessions that we can have as well. Some of them involve short-run aggregate supply. Right? Here's our model. Here's short-run aggregate supply. And now we could think about something that pushes short-run aggregate supply up. Right? This could be something like the government passes a law saying firms have to offer more benefits. That increases the cost to firms. And so short-run aggregate supply is going to shift up. This increase in costs onto firms encourages firms to lay workers off and causes the same recession, but now prices are rising. In response to the new law, firms change their behavior, but one, by passing some of the higher prices on to consumers, and two, laying off some workers. So we've got a recession on our hands. And government says, aha, I know how to cure recessions. Let me spend money. The government can absolutely spend money, and the government can shift that aggregate demand curve out by spending money, and it can absolutely cure the recession. But now it comes at a cost, even higher prices. It reflects this trade-off between prices and output. The government has to pick both, right? Here, aggregate demand shift is what the government can do. Shifting aggregate demand always increases prices and always increases output. The government can't pick and choose which of these things. There are two things to affect, and the government only has one tool. So here, the government does not quite as good a job as fighting the recession as it did before. And that's because the government spending affects aggregate demand. Governments can manipulate aggregate demand directly, and so in demand-driven aggregate demand recessions, the government fiscal policy can cure these things really, really, really well. However, for supply-side recessions like we've got here, well, the government can't directly control the cost structure of firms. It can only control aggregate demand through spending, and aggregate demand just doesn't work as well in solving this sort of recession.